Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamit in Highland Park, New Jersey, the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation, Anshe Emet, and joining me, my good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Schechter, Day School of Long Island, Rabbi Jeremy Kamenofsky of Anshe Chesed in New York City. We are recording this a few days after the historic win of the United States Olympic hockey team. A great moment in not only USA hockey history, but also a little footnote in Jewish American sports history, maybe Jewish sports history. The golden goal, it's called. The golden goal, the winning goal in overtime, scored by Jack Hughes. Jack Hughes, Jewish kid from Michigan. And also the title of that famous Emil Zola essay. Barry, do you have the access to the historical background of Jacques in your mind?
But just there was a pamphlet he wrote protesting
Oh, it was on the Figaro. I thought no,
dreyfus.
it was on the front page of some papers.
Yeah, it was about
The Dreyfus affair, the
I think
Dreyfus
it was
trial.
after he was convicted the second time.
Right, and he accused Emile Zola accused the French government or whoever it
Yeah.
was of their anti-Semitism, j'accuse. So it makes a good trivia. But I thought it was a great moment, and kol kavod to them.
I'm impressed. I'm impressed that because the the red blood in your veins flows
Go,
way from
Steve. You
veins.
know what? We honor hockey greatness wherever it is, and it was too bad that the Canadians lost. But you know what? From time to time, Canada needs to lose to teach them a lesson. And let's face it, there's a lot of anti-Semitism in Canada right now, and I'm not happy about that. And we can talk about that in the second
Thank
part
God
of
there's
our
none in the United States.
exactly less. But the Zachor is our Parsha. It's a special Shabbos this week because it's the Shabbat before Purim. Maybe we'll have a chance to talk about it later on in our little conversation. But first, let's talk about Parshat Tetzaveh. Before we do that, our condolences to our colleague Rabbi Stephen Kane, the loss of his sister. Rabbi Steve Kane was one of our participants on the Parsha Talk way back in Camp Ramah days, and we are extending our condolences to him on the loss of his sister. Parsha Tetzaveh, this Shabbat, which is often conjoined with Parsha Truma. And the reason for that is obvious because these two parshiot deal with the instructions for the construction of the Mishkan and all of the appurtenances and the clothing of the priests, and all of that we can go into. But I want to focus on two things which I almost feel is like if we were to draw an ellipse around this parsha, we'd have two focal points. And that maybe the ellipse is a good allegory for this because one focal point is the in the Kodesh Kodashim, where between the wings of the keruvim on the Aron HaKodesh, on the Aron HaIdut, on the tent, on the Ark of the Covenant, that is where God will speak to Moses. And then at the opening of the Ohel Moed, the Petach Ohel Moed, God will speak to the people. So I'm going to focus on two psukim, one at the beginning, which is chapter 25, verse 22, where it says, V'no'arati lecha sham, God speaking to Moses, I will meet you there. And he's talking about above the Ark of the Covenant. I will meet you there. V'dibarti itcha, I'm going to talk to you. Me'al hakaporet, on top of the covering, the kaporet is the covering of the coffer, the box. Mi bein shnei keruvim, in between the two little cherubs, Ashel Aron HaIdut, that is on the Ark of the Covenant, et kol asher tzavech otcha el bnei Israel, all the things that I'm going to command to you to bnei Israel. So I just want to slip into midrash mode here for a second because the rabbis have a very, very interesting midrash about the configuration of the two keruvim on top of the ark. And if that is the image here, that the two keruvim are in this intimate embrace, think about it. And I'm going to turn to you, Rabbi Kamenofsky, because you have a knack for this. You have
This is
a
my
sensitivity to this.
this
So,
is
do you
my
want to
this is
just
my zone.
touch
Yeah.
on this for us?
The Torah is clear. The Torah is clear that the two cherubs are a single piece of gold beaten out, such that it forms. It's gold is malleable, and it's crafted out to be two cherubs. And so at their heads, at their wings, at their torsos, they seem like distinct creatures. But if you follow that at the beginning, they're a single creature, and that connotes to generations of mystically inclined and midrashically inclined interpreters that they are, as in the words of, I think this is in Tractate Sukkah, panim gidolot, panim ktanot, that is to say, big faces, small faces, or male faces and female faces, and they are seen to be arrayed as in erotic conjunction in that special way.
Involved. They're involved with each other.
They're involved. And in Tractate Yoman, the Gemara, it says something really extraordinary that that when Jews came on pilgrimage, the Kohanim would bring out the kaparet to display to the pilgrimage and say, "Behold, Israel, the love of God for Israel is like the Shabbat Zachor lenekeva, for the love of male for female," and they brought out this vivid image of Eros as the model for God's relationship with the Jewish people, and that's not. The Kabbalah loves this, and it's expatiated upon in mystical literature, but that appears in the regular old Talmud. So, even pretty sober and not the world's most mystically oriented books appreciate that Eros and conjunction between the beings is like all the way. It's turtles all the way down.
So I just want to kind of give a non-mystical, and which in the end is mystical, because whether what combination, what configuration they're in or not, the idea that Moses meets the invisible deity above the box, above the keruvim, in an infinitesimal spot, right, and that there's a voice coming out of there. It's actually quite an image. It's fascinating. I mean, how this is accomplished, of course, is the mystery that God speaks to Moses. So in a sense, there is, if you want to kind of demystify it, this is the moment of the place of meeting. I'm going to make an appointment with you. I'm going to meet you. I'm going to speak to you there. And how that happens, the mechanics of the speaking, the audio waves, the electronic, the transmission, forget that. You're going to be there, and you're going to have a moment where I'm disclosing myself to you, and you're going to apprehend whatever you can apprehend. And that's the moment, and that's the place. So what's so striking here is that it's a specific place, and that God is saying, I'm making a specific place and time for you, when I'm going to meet you. Okay?
This furthermore explains why it's called Ohel Moed.
Exactly, tent of meeting.
Yes.
Right, but I would add two things. First of all, the purpose of this meeting is for God to command Moses to tell Bnei Israel, which suggests to me at least that God might appear in other places in the Ohel Moed for other kinds of conversation which do not involve the transmission of law and commandment. And the second thing that occurred to me listening to you speak is that when Aharon goes into the Kodesh HaKodeshim in chapter 16 of Vayikra, it's going to be with a cloud of smoke. So I think one of the things that this verse does is it sets apart quite clearly Moshe from Aharon, because Moshe, again, it's that image that we have elsewhere in the Torah, meets God panim el panim.
Interesting. So now I want to fast forward to almost the end of Tetzaveh. It's in the sixth aliyah of Tetzaveh, where we have the same word. These are the only two times that this very same word occurs in the Torah, and it's chapter 29, verse 43. V'no'adati shama livnei Israel. I will meet there the children of Israel, and there is the entrance to the Ohel Moed. So I will meet the children of Israel at the entrance of the tent of meeting, v'nikdash b'chodi, and the tent of meeting, will be sanctified by my presence. V'kidash it Ohel Moed, and I will sanctify, etc., etc., etc. I will dwell with the people. So it seems to me, and again, I'm going to use the image of the ellipse. The ellipse in geometry has two focal points. One focal point of the divine ellipse with Israel is the Holy of Holies and the Ark of the Covenant. The other elliptical focal point would be the entrance to the Ohel Moed. Now, we know that the Mizbeach functions as the center of the outer square, and we know that the Kodesh Kodeshim functions as the center of the inner square, and that also is a symmetry. But here, what I'm reaching for is this idea that there are two types of communication. One is the divine, intimate conversation with Moses, and then the public conversation, or maybe it's an intimate conversation with Bnei Israel. In other words, I have private and public.
But what's striking is that the intimate conversation has the connotation of commandment in it, and here is more an idea of conversation.
Right. Well, so not to use contemporary terms of power, but there are private loci of power where you have the intimate conversation between the sovereign or the leader or the head of government and the closest to them, and then you have the public where I don't want to make too many analogies, but I'll use it for the sake of not getting into personalities, but for the sake of the way that the system is structured, that the head of state makes a public speeches, public declarations at convocations, and the head of state also has private, consultations. So, and government functions on both levels, right? Every government has this. Every government has its secret cabinets or secret advisors. Let's look at, I don't know, the government of Israel, where the prime minister has a security cabinet. And then when the prime minister wants to make a public declaration, either will go to the Knesset or go on the media, or will go have a press conference, which is rare for this prime minister. But the point is that there are two different kinds of conversations, and I'm wondering if that's the way to go with these two things. I don't know how you react to that.
I don't know. So explain that again.
I'm saying that God works with Israel on two levels. I got my private conversation with my bestie, Moses, and I got my public conversation with my favorite people, the people of Israel. And my private conversation is going to be different. What I talk to Moses about is going to be different from what I talk to the Bnei Israel about.
So, not to push the image too much, but the idea that comes to mind is the president of the United States has one kind of conversation in the Oval Office,
exactly,
which is more intimate, and a different kind of conversation in the House of Representatives when he delivers a State of the Union.
There
he should.
Go.
He should have that.
He should have that. Okay. Now, as I say, it's very hard to make these analogies, but having witnessed part of that speech last
one
night,
of the things that's striking to me is that God appears in the Ohel Moed, the way that you've described it in the last verse that we looked at, which suggests that at this level of the Torah, we can't really pretend that God is everywhere. But God actually has a place on earth where if he's not there, he's not on earth. But it's not like he's somewhere else or everywhere. He's at a specific place. That's where God can be channeled, either in the outside, which is, and the significance of the courtyard is that's as far as Bnei Israel can go. They're not allowed to go into the Kodesh or the Kodesh HaKodeshim. So if God wants to speak to them, that has to be the location. Yeah. Moses, however, could go all the way inside.
So I think I think the questions about, I mean, I was just a religiously interesting question to me about holy space. If you are a good monotheist, you have to believe that God is everywhere and really undifferentiated, because then if God is sort of more concentrated in the Kotel than in Topeka, Kansas, that diminishes your ability to say Hashem Echad, and so a good monotheist has to be a little suspicious about the idea of sacred space. And yet the original use of the word Tzimtzum in the Midrash is not Tzimtzum as it's used in Kabbalah, that God sort of empties out a space so that God can create the world. It's that God squeezes God's help into the Mishkan. And so I do think that, like, the way the Torah has, the way the rabbis have of talking about sacred space is that God is more concentrated in certain places than others and at certain times than in others. And I don't know that I think that puts for me certain kinds of religious problems,
Yes.
spiritual problems, but it is part and parcel of our religious tradition.
Okay, so let's go to the problems, which is, even listening to this kind of conversation would be like, come on, that's not how people experience it. Of course, this is part of the way we imagine the past, but you know, we have to use metaphor and allegory and other kinds of situation to illustrate it. I'm very fond of saying the following, which is, I invented this little phrase: if you want to see the miracle of human achievement, go to the neonatal ward. If you want to see the miracle of human compassion, go to the palliative ward, the cancer ward, where people
Oh,
and yeah, and you know what?
nicely done.
What I mean in that is that and all of us have experienced this, certainly. You enter into a hospital room where someone is, dying. You've had this experience. Jeremy had it recently, and every time and space is different in that room. There's a level, we don't know what to call it. We call it holiness, or we call it something other. You go to a neonatal ward where a tiny preemie is being sustained by unbelievable equipment, and then 3 months later, that kid is able to be nursed and cradled by their mother and be collected by their family, and it's nothing short of a miracle. We've experienced organ transplant in Kim's life, and it's unbelievable. Okay, this is unbelievable, and these are it's yeah, they're transcendent experiences, they're whole experience. So I can't help but reflect on we're kind of charged up because of the legislation in Israel about the Kotel, and on the one hand, the obscenity of outlawing egalitarian prayer at the Kotel and making it criminal and putting people in jail for doing that is so offensive. It's beyond offensive to the sensibility of Klal Yisrael and the cohesion of Klal Yisrael. It needs to be said, it needs to be articulated, it needs to be talked about. Notwithstanding the terrible, terrible experiences that we've had over the last 2 years. And yet, I would say, look, my relationship with the Kotel, it's holy in the sense that it's different there, but I have a feeling of history there, a feeling of civilization, a feeling of culture there. God's presence at the Kotel, I'm not sure.
I have, first of all, I want to say two things about that. I love the Kotel. I really love it. I find it very moving. And when I think it through, it's not so much because God's presence, but because of all the prayers that we have poured to that
Exactly,
spot.
exactly.
But with respect to the legislation, and those who are listening may know about it or not, it's introduced by a really extreme figure named Avi Maoz, whose anti-gay rhetoric, whose settler extremism, whose anti-Arab rhetoric, they're really just, truly revolting. And it's one of those. It appears that Netanyahu is probably not going to fight for this. We would like it. We would like it if our pressure would contribute to him not wanting to fight for it. But the messianic fundamentalists, uh, I could go on, wing of the religious community. What the law, if I understand correctly, not maybe I'm missing the point, but it is a law against the desecration of religious space. Now we're talking about the sanctification of a spot. A religious violation, if I brought in a bacon sandwich to the Kotel, that would be a violation. But I can't conceive of a suggestion that I desecrated the space. Well, maybe in the ancient Beit HaMikdash that was true, but because bacon is ritually tameh, ritually impure. But what would conservative prayer be? It would be a violation of what Orthodox Jews think should happen. I do appreciate that it's a violation, but it doesn't diminish the holiness of the site, does it? No, it can't. You know, if I go to the altar of a church somewhere in the Holy Land and I smash the cross and I throw over the sanctified bread and wine, that is a desecration. I'm sure I can think of something in
If
Islam
you
that,
brought in a pig and sacrificed it in the
but
Kotel
only by
Plaza,
Right,
sacrificing,
but
okay?
I think the point, Jeremy, that you're making is that words cannot render something impure.
I would certainly
Only an object can.
I'm inclined to believe that. And even if, a woman putting on tefillin and reading the Torah is, by Orthodox standards, non-normative and it's a violation, fine. You are entitled to think it's the way we daven is a violation. But that extra step of thinking that you did it in this wrong way somehow desecrates, desanctifies the space in which I'm happy to say, the model that Elliot's proposing, that I meet you there and we have an encounter there and we connect there intimately. That to me is like a profoundly wrong-headed way to think about
yeah.
what sanctity and desanctity is.
Yeah, look, I mean, again, it's for us, it's profoundly meaningful as a historic and piece of antiquity and a place that arouses really a sense of awe. I mean, there's a tremendous sense of awe and majesty, especially in the egalitarian Kotel area, the Robinson Arch area, which is all dilapidated, and there's all sorts of problems, bureaucratic problems, and political problems dealing with that place. But it's an awesome place to be, to step right in that presence and to say, this has been around for 2,000 years, at least the time of Herod. It has its place as it's a wall from an engineering perspective. It's a retaining wall. It holds up the platform above, but it's the last remnant of what was, and it's still there. And that itself is arouses a sense of awe. But in terms of my own spirituality and my own religious experience, to the extent that encountering history and being in the modern state of Israel is inspiring, obviously. But in terms of the driving theological question, which is where is God, or is God's presence concentrated in one place over another? I suggest go to the neonatal ward, go to a transplant operating theater, go to the palliative care ward, and you'll be saturated with God's presence and miracles and things that are beyond comprehension, just unbelievably moving spiritual things. And that's because end of life, beginning of life, life itself, life force, these are powerful things that are beyond explanation. And you know what? Maybe we ought to change the conversation to understanding that, even our synagogue, I love my synagogue. I love being in my synagogue. It's a beautiful place. I'm sure you love yours. We have great experiences there. There's tremendous, the room is saturated, with holiness in some way, even though it's in Highland Park, New Jersey, little New Jersey, right? All right.
Go figure.
We gotta take 2 seconds or 5 minutes to talk about the other special part of this Shabbat, which is it's Zachor, Parasha Zachor. Just want to, Jeremy Kalmanovsky, Rabbi, tell us what Shabbat Zachor is and tell us what we're remembering and why anti-Semites are disgusting.
So
25 words or less.
So Haman is called Ha'agagi, and in the story, that's just some sort of ethnic name. I mean, I don't think that it's a coincidence. I mean, it's intentional. It's not like a random thing. He's called Ha'agagi, but Agag is also the king of the Amalekites. In a story in the book of Samuel that Saul fails. Saul is told he should, and in Shmuel Aleph is told that he should kill every last Amalekite, but he does not do that, and he saves Agag until Shmuel says, "You were supposed to obey here, dummy." And so Shmuel kills King Agag, and Agag is therefore associated with the Amalekites. Haman is associated therefore with the Amalekites, and Amalek, as you may remember from the stories in Exodus chapter, I guess that is 17. They are these warlike people who attack the Israelites on the way out of Egypt for absolutely no reason. They just want to destroy. They're like, vicious, vermicious canids, and they attack the Israelites, and then all the way down later, and in that passage, Moses says, Yad al Kesia milchama Adonai ba'amalek midor dor. I swear by the throne of God, says God, that there will be an eternal war between me and the Amalekites forever, for all generations. And so in Devarim, in the end of Parshat Ki Tetzaveh, it says, Zachor et asher asa lecha Amalek. Don't ever forget what Amalek did to you, and you must blot out the memory of Amalek. Don't forget. There's a paradoxical reflection. You have to remember to constantly erase. Don't forget to erase. Well, if you actually ever successfully erased, then there wouldn't be anything else to remember. So it's a strange little paradox. But what Amalek comes to represent is not just one people with whom, the Serbs hate the Croats, who hate the Bosnians. It comes to represent in Jewish tradition the embodiment of those destructive, violent, cruel forces. And so you always have to remember Amalek. You have to remember the individual Amalek family is long gone, but what they represent, the violence, the hatred, you have to remember. And it's especially for those of us in the 20th century, after the Nazi period and after the viciousness with which the Soviets tried to blot out any kind of ongoing Jewish life, I find it not at all hard to feel the vividness of the commandment. And needless to say, we have a real national struggle with the Palestinian people that's been on for 100 years and is not ending so fast. I would not certainly by any means call the Palestinians Amalek, but Hamas and their tactics are at least Amalekesque. And so you have to, you have to. It can't all be flowers and sunshines and v'ahavta l'orecha kamocha in this religion. You also have to contend with actual evil and actual destruction. And the remembering Amalek on the eve of Purim, remembering that there are Hamans in the world, is part of the tools that we have to contend with a really sometimes awful world.
So what I think what's important to remember, first of all, the stories are very short. The story in Exodus is 9 verses. It's the shortest Torah reading of the year. Doesn't even fit the rabbinic model that a Torah reading has to be at least 10 verses. And then we read them after, as Jeremy mentioned, the 3 verses at the end of Ki Tetzaveh. But what's striking to me is that Amalek is not an existential threat. And so the modern analog, in my mind, is terrorism. They create a lot of havoc. They attack the weak and the vulnerable, but they are not an existential threat. And this is further emphasized because they're not to be dealt with until there's peace in the land. Israel first has to conquer the land, settle it, and only then can they tend to Amalek. And then suddenly, by the time we get to Esther, we have the passage in Shmuel where Amalek is apparently completely wiped out because Saul kills all the men and then Samuel kills the king. So who's left?
Yeah.
And then we have a kind of morphing in the book of Esther. So it's a story that is very difficult, I think, to isolate exactly what it's trying to teach us. I agree with Jeremy that one part of it is that there is evil in the world and it's an ongoing battle. I think the message for us is that we should never think that we'll ever get to a point where evil will be vanquished in this world. That would be the ultimate redemption, and that would lead us to another world, I would think.
I want to just, we're running out of time, but I want to just take a moment to think about a theme that's connected to Purim, which is, on some level, what we're doing to deal with the people that hate us is to ridicule them. This is, I have no other person other than Mel Brooks to identify with this idea, which is, I'm showing the world how awful they are by ridiculing them. The worst thing that I could, or the best thing that I could do to show that anti-Semitism is vanquished is to, has been, and we're contending with it in this way, is to ridicule them. And that's his deeper thinking behind, Springtime for Hitler and the producers.
Don't be stupid, be a smarty, come and join
it's a trope in all minority humor. If you think of Uncle Remus and Joel Chandler, the stories of Brer Rabbit, and you find it in other cultures as well. It's not unique to the Jews.
It may not be unique to the Jews, but it's our way of empowering ourselves.
We're really good at it. We're
really good at it. And
we've been at it a long time.
So not to be too serious about ridicule, but the conversation in the Jewish world after, a couple of weeks ago, Bret Stephens gave the State of World Jewry speech in which he said, listen, our response to anti-Semitism ought to be not to care. That is to say, to ridicule, to understand that this is the vile, the stupid, the ridiculous, the demented, and basically he's saying in a sophisticated way that we ought to ridicule them, we ought to not take them seriously. And on one level, he's absolutely right. On the other level, because anti-Semitism, and he did say this too, anti-Semitism, it can be lethal, can lead to terrible things that will, hasten demise of Jews physically. People get killed because of it. You and I walk into our synagogues now and have to have guards guarding our shuls at public events because of the psychological nature and also the physical nature. There's a guy with a gun standing at the entrance to my shul because people need that. We need that. I have hockey pucks in my lectern just in case. I don't come with a gun, God forbid.
You
but
do not. You have a hockey puck?
Seriously,
what are you going to do? You're going to throw a hockey puck at something?
At the last resort, in my, what are you going to do?
The last resort. Elliot, do you have a stick also? You're going to let go of slap shots.
You know what? God forbid it should ever get to that, okay? The rabbi died throwing a hockey puck.
Well, that would be ridicule.
And then we must.
Anyway, the point, though, I think, is that it could be a little facile to say we have to ridicule anti-Semites.
All right.
I think that the real issue is that you can't kill all the anti-Semites, so you have to find a way to deal with some. Some of them are redeemable, and some of them opinions can be moved.
Well, you know what? I think that this is a great debate. We probably have to have another debate for this because I concede on some level that yes, some anti-Semites have been redeemed and do traverse across a boundary. We have wonderful stories that have been compiled in anthologies like Chicken Soup for the Jewish Soul about this, okay? But our experience is that most anti-Semites remain anti-Semites, and it doesn't go, they don't get redeemed from anti-Semitism, they actually become worse. Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens have gotten worse. Okay?
Yeah, but I don't actually agree with you on that point. I mean, Tucker Carlson, I agree with you, but that's not my experience of most. Being an American in the latter half of the 20th and the beginning of the 21st century, okay, not that there's not racism and not that there's not still problems of certain structural racisms and the indelible, effects of multi-generational poverty and all of those things, that's all true. And it is not okay. It is no longer okay to be an anti-Black racist. People in America have absorbed that is a morally offensive and a moral crime. And I think that that's true about, I think that actually the story of America likewise is that it's not acceptable to hate Jews, even though we do have real problems with it. So I
think it's a great debate because it's been normalized. Our anti-Semitism has been normalized on the left and on the right, and you're absolutely right in saying that it's so unacceptable, morally unacceptable to express black hatred. But you want to go to the inner sanctums of sancta of people, and I'm sure that conversation exists. It's there. Okay, the point is that again, Purim is here, so on some level, the defense mechanism of Purim is to ridicule this and to show that we vanquished anti-Semitism, this arch anti-Semitic, and we compose our Purim spiels and our things like that, and make fun and dress up in costumes and invert reality a little bit and get a little, we enjoy life a little bit on Purim, and that's okay, and that's great. So.
Yeah.
So maybe we could talk about this on Parshat Parah.
You got it. Okay. Well, I want to end with one little haiku for my passive aggressive. For Purim, I'm saying this Shabbat is passive aggressive awareness Shabbat. So instead of writing a big Parsha sheet, I'm writing a haiku card. Beautiful Esther, our extinction averted, light and joy celebration.
Amen. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Happy Purim, everyone. We'll see you next week.
Purim.
And thank you for watching and listening. See you next week on the next edition of Parsha Talk. Bye-bye.